Dr. Relman.
So I was thinking about the kinds of resources that might be needed for work, the proposed work in all four of these groups. And we had a brief discussion about the, uh, the fragmented nature of the funding system that is not well aligned with the One Health view, such that much of this work might be difficult to fund with the existing defined portfolios and priorities of individual institutions, and therefore wondered about new sorts of funding systems or organizational principles or something that would bring together what are now separate institutions to collaborate on the resources needed to do some of these things.
Some innovation.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. George?
Much lurks within the multidimensional nature of what every group has reported, but a couple of minor nuances coming out of Emily's presentation that links to Jeff's requirements for data and the critical issues of standardization of data. I know that's belaboring the obvious, and I have no simple solution for it, but I think without that primacy, we will falter on both grounds. And then derivative from biosignatures, the value of building up comprehensive and well-curated biorepositories of organisms with defined phenotypes.
Well, I was talking with John a little bit and musing on some things. I think, one of the difficulties of AMR, which was true at the beginning, which remains true now, is, as David, you were saying, it's so big that it's really hard to package together funding. It's hard to package together the partners and all of these things. Creating new systems to handle that's really hard, and I don't think that's a winnable solution, to tell you the truth. But in talking with John, there are things which, as a country, we do which can be handled in this way. When you think about what are things in which you can get blue and red to rally around that you can handle in a big way, there are things like national parks, there are things like clean water, there are things like battleships and so on. These things sort of transcend a lot of the things which we do. And I think one of the issues, one of the reasons why there's a wobble is because our whole idea about what is AMR is still in play. Again, you listen around the room and AMR is described in a lot of different ways and is thought of in a lot of different ways. And we have not found that way which sort of unifies everybody in a clear way. But I think that one of the things coming out of this forum is that coming in the post-UN period time, this is a kind of idea-shaping, concept-shaping meeting and so on. And one of the things which I would really push for as an outcome of this meeting is that you try to get us a little bit closer to what is that unified concept so that things like funding, things like the politics can rally around what is AMR and so on. And it's a little bit, because I'm really most worried not about the period right now, but when you put on the question of sustainability. The more complicated solution we have to various aspects of AMR, in a lot of ways it becomes very hard to maintain and so on. And I think the whole question of how do you sustain attention to an issue like AMR, which has to have that on an open-ended basis. It's not a solvable problem. It's just something that you keep at a certain manageable level. So it's a kind of a management issue. And so I think that there are things out there that we treat that way, and I just want to put it on the table that this is one of those issues which I think should be given serious consideration about can we move it so that we think of antimicrobial drugs in the same way that we do think about clean water. We use as much as we need, but we don't waste it. or it's like food. You know, you eat as much as you need and you don't waste it, and you get, it's a concept which people can understand.
John, do you want to comment?
I was going to say, yeah, so the very last way you put that together, if you put it into the security framework list, secure food, secure water, secure antibiotic supply, I mean, that's a, maybe that's a way to build on some of the other ideas that are in that space.
Yeah, good thought. Thank you. It's open for anything, folks. We have until 3:30. Lonnie's working on his lengthy closing comments at the moment, but are we okay? Yes, and then Jesse after.
I mean, I think sort of the grandness of the challenge is what makes these discussions difficult to say what are the sort of feasible ways forward. But just expanding on some of the conversations we had in our group is that, we talked about this in discussion, is that there, and then Peter and I were just discussing at the end of our discussion, is that there are some things where you need to really strengthen the AMR sort of ecosystem for action. You need that banner. But there are a lot of things which you can actually insert into existing agendas which have existing communities for action. And you need both. It's not an either-or thing. And again, I think if you look at the sort of example, and I've said this 3 times, so sorry for repeating myself, but the experience of climate change is that things moved in climate change which weren't necessarily people were identifying were acting on climate change. So transport planners want to reduce congestion because that's a key deliverable for them, right? Or you want to address air pollution because you're worried about the visibility, the health impacts. And all of those things contribute to climate change. Or you want to generate energy and then you sort of models change. And so, yes, those all contribute to climate change. And then you can put them under Paris if you want. But really, how many people know what is in Paris? Very few. But still people are acting in their own spheres of interest. So I think there are similarities for AMR and in that you can have specific action. And just to think, we talk about, well, we need better data in terms of the usage of antibiotics. And that may be something at the moment you can do in a few health systems, but you can't do it in many. And yet there's a huge agenda around strengthening health systems, which is around including improving data for health systems performance, particularly in low and middle income countries. And so how can you sort of insert into that you better monitor the use of antibiotics and the outcomes around antibiotics around the quality agenda in healthcare, right? So there are other examples. And then at the same time, there are very specific things you need to do for AMR, which need to be under an AMR agenda. They're not going to be done elsewhere, and you put your energy into that. And that, when you think about the sort of sustainability dimension, might help you to have a taxonomy and think about which actors you need for which different parts. And if you are going to convene, you can focus specifically on building new convening platforms for the things that need a new ecosystem. I mean, I think that's quite important. Also then on the data, rather than, and again, of course we need the hard science and we need data on usage and behavior, but you need also data on the policy implications of the things you're advocating for. So, and you do need data around the impact on economic markets. And you need to convene people to do that. And perhaps even some scenarios around, some modeling around different sort of regulatory choices and what that would mean for economic markets and what would be the impact on the private sector. So I think those are just some suggestions in that perhaps by it is a very big problem, but cutting it into pieces, but not losing that there is still the need for the big picture might make it a bit more digestible and you can identify the specific actions required.
Okay, thank you. Jesse?
Yeah, I think it's a great point, and also to agree with KG with the importance of message and carrying this on in a sustainable way. I do think if we for some of us in the room, Dennis, others, Rima, Jim, 20 years ago, it was very hard getting any attention to this issue. Now, if I had to complain, it's probably there's too many meetings about it and there's too much attention. But I think the question is how you continue the momentum. And I think, the U.S. action plan, the WHO action plans have, more than for many issues, have enumerated pretty good agendas. They haven't necessarily prioritized them, but there's a lot going on. I was just amazed by the brief part of this where I was here and able to hear just sort of some of what's going on in agriculture is revolutionary compared to, a few years ago we were struggling even to get people to pay attention to antibiotics in agriculture. And so that was market-driven. People wanted, FDA's work helped, but people wanted food without a lot of antibiotics. So I think it's good to recognize the progress, good to recognize that there are valid plans out there, and also that there are revolutions in science, from the microbiome to vaccinology to metabolomics, that really offer new potential. So we're at a hopeful place in my mind, but keeping attention is important. If there's one thing I've observed that gets attention, it's the idea that we'll have untreatable infections, which we do. I mean, you can't over-dramatize and say it's going to happen tomorrow, but it's that idea, and it's also the idea that our basic health system that we take for granted, to be able to have surgery, et cetera, would be threatened by this. So I still think it's very important that as scientists, we have a clear, and physicians and veterinarians and ecologists, we have a clear message that there is something there that is not abstract and that affects, every human being.
Thank you. Sally.
So I think we have a problem now, and we've got to look at what's urgent and what's doable and what are the no-brainers. And I think that is a period of 18 months to 2 years, because we have to give a report to the Secretary General, who has to report back to the UN at the high level. We then move into I expect a 5-year period where we will have had in this next 18 months an opportunity to shape what are the changes we want, what are the targets, the structures and everything for the next period, and then there's the longer term. So what are the no-brainers? Well, it's AMR in all policies. We can't deliver UHC without doing it. What is UNICEF doing on everything? Gates is now looking at everything through an AMR lens. TB and malaria will be stuck if we don't support them and help work on it, etc. But I think it stretches further. I really enjoyed all the agriculture work that we heard about into the private sector in all sorts of ways. So I know 2 companies, one a big one and one a small one with 50 people, who both have what look like effective drugs for gonorrhea. Now, just at the moment, no one's put it on a list, but I know, and I'm a hematologist, that we will need a gonorrhea drug, a new one, within the next 5 years, 10 years. And yet, because it's not on one of those lists, the big company says, oh, well, we'll put it to the back of the pile, and the small company is not managing to raise money. So I don't think new drugs are the only answer, but they are part of the answer. And so far, we haven't got the incentives right so that we can even help those drugs that are out there that look very hopeful be pulled through. So I do think we're going to have to look at that. Another thing I'd put on the table is we don't have a public face for this. Civil society is not engaged. We're getting a bit of consumer pull. And I don't mind drug-resistant infection. In fact, when I talk to the public, I talk about that. I do object, John, to DRI, because then let's stick with AMR that all the politicians understand. And Jeremy Farrar promised me he would never use DRI. But the politics are such, it will be AMR on the global stage. and there isn't an ICD code for when people have severe morbidity or mortality from that, and we're having difficulty getting the WHO to produce a code. I've even had my Office of National Statistics go and beat them up about it and say, we want this as a government, it must be doable. But if we want standardized data, we need that. So do you think we should be asking for that from this workshop? To try and develop a public face, pull in civil society in a different way, while we also have to help the consumer pull on the health system, but actually the food chain. So I think it's about what do we do in the next 18 months, what do we want for the next phase, and then the longer term. And there's underpinning all of that a discussion about accountabilities and governance that I think for the next 18 months we can kind of muddle through, but will need to bubble out and be thought through for the next phase. And I'm quite worried about a schism I see coming where the real aficionados, and Rima and others will know who I'm talking about, think we need a new UN body for AMR, we need a global fund for AMR. And the geopolitics would be against that. And actually it's wrong, I think. We need to see AMR as an underpinning issue that impacts on the whole health system and food chain, and we've got to strengthen health systems. But if we're not careful, we'll find those who care about this subject starting to have a battle about what the future structures are and whether there's enough money. There isn't enough money. Whether we need a special fund, that won't work, rather than staying together, which we are at the moment, to help people lead better lives and have safer food.
Thank you for those sage comments and advice. Lonnie, you want to respond?
No, I think those are great remarks. I mean, so one of the things that I've seen that's a change and the momentum that's shifting is a shift in the conversation from kind of animal agriculture and human health from 5 years ago or 10 years ago to finger pointing, right? And it was all about who was going to make a gain. And you handle controversies and disagreements in three ways. One is that you share interests, which is what we're getting to now, or you can bring it into who's right. And if you bring it into who's right and who's wrong, then you get lawyers involved, or you can actually make laws or regulations, which is actually the last thing you'd probably want to do. So the conversation has shifted from it's their fault versus our fault to one now that I think that we really need to talk about common interests. So if you put all the players around the table like we were doing to say, you know, here's what I really want to get out of this. This is really the most important thing for me. And we did a little bit of that. And somebody says, well, this is the most important thing for me. And all of a sudden you come up with shared interests. And if you actually get a concurrence on that, right, you don't go into who's right or you don't go into regulations or those other ways. And the second thing that I've kind of learned doing that is that everybody thinks when you move into shared interests, you compromise. And the answer is you don't compromise. You actually do have shared interests. No one has to give up anything if you agree that these interests are in everybody's best interest for an outcome. So that's what's happened the last 3 or 4 years that I've seen. The language has changed. We're starting to really look at these shared interests now. And a lot of that conversation in these groups were really about shared interest. So I think if we can actually get that and have that agreement, then I think the momentum continues. And part of that shared interest is the public. They have to be involved with this. And that's the kind of meeting that I think kind of follows on to that. And it makes a lot of sense when you don't talk about rights and you really talk about interests.
Yeah, let me pick up and expand slightly on that. I've been to a lot of meetings on this broad topic. I have to say this is, of all the meetings that I can recall, the most well-balanced in terms of disciplines and topics covered, and all this done in a very collegial manner, as I think you indicated. So I'd like to thank everybody for their contributions. But we're not quite finished, so there's time for more. Jesse?
I think your comment is a great lead-in, because I think this synergy between the idea that the problem is complex enough, demanding enough, important enough, that both the payoffs and the solutions are across multiple, and have to be across multiple sectors. So human and animal, environment is one. I think the other one, that having seen product development from the FDA and from the government trying to get products that are not incentivized by clear markets or by current payment systems, and we heard some discussion of this, I do think the public-private partnerships and being sure that both those sectors and government, public, private, and government, just like human, animal, and environment, need to work together on this, and the incentives need to be right. I'm concerned that this is a very, we keep hearing it, and there's progress being made. There are several companies staying in the antibiotic business, et cetera. There are the incentives that people discussed. But I think if the baby could get thrown out with the basket, if it isn't realized by both academia and government that it really is industry that has the know-how to get new products, whether they're drugs and vaccines. So and I worry this could get caught up in the pricing debates and many of the valid critiques of industry that are there. So I think the nature of solutions here involves those multiple spaces. And again, the academy is going to be a place and a format to convene that.
I know we're waiting for Rima, but this is directly derivative from that point. And I think that who knows within the stridency of the debate about drug pricing as to exactly what level of draconian but nonetheless unhelpful solutions will come from the body politic. But in broad terms, I think if you link it back to what Sally said in terms of a manageable agenda, I think I applaud John Rex's presentation earlier today, because it had just an intrinsic pragmatism of recognizing tragically how fragile the development process is. And as has just been pointed out, any belief that this can be done without industry, and I think if you go back to the Infectious Diseases Society of America document 10 by 20, that is as delusional a document as you could ever see, that you would have 10 new antibiotics by 2020 done by people who have absolutely no experience in the drug development domain. With respect, though, Jim, I'm not being contentious here. All the time that is allowed to persist as a myth, that if the Denzians of high academia continue to propagate the view that this is in fact a solvable problem on that scale, and that actually begins to permeate sensibly into a pragmatic policy, we'll find ourselves sitting here 10 years from now with exactly the same situation.
I think there is general agreement that new drugs are not the sole solution to this complex problem that we deal with.
They proliferate like mushrooms.
They certainly don't. Okay, Peter.
Well said, George. As usual, you express your opinions rarely but forcefully. But I'm interested in what's driving all this, and it's sort of a global commons issue, isn't it? That it seems that in the US we're really beginning to fix the problems in livestock production. It was really refreshing to hear what's going on in the poultry industry, in the beef industry, to solve this, and that's really, really impressive. But then what about countries like India, China, Brazil, Thailand, where antimicrobials are freely available and unregulated, where there's very little data being collected? And we can collect as much surveillance data as we want. We can fix the problem in the US completely, but with it being so easy for these genes and these bugs to get around, we're still going to be suffering from this issue. So I think the industry also needs to try and reach out and open up a bit in the developing world, in the sales data that drive all of this, as well as the surveillance data that they gather and that we all gather. and we need to reach out internationally. I know this has been part of the discussions, but I think that's really important, because if we don't at least understand where the issues are, we can't target the surveillance as well as we should. We can't target the governance stewardship issues as well as we should. So understanding where the big risks are needs industry to open up their sales data and surveillance data, so we can actually deal with the problem in a more effective and cheaper way.
Okay, thank you. Looking at the clock, what I'm going to do is give Rima the last word, almost the last word, and then turn it back to Lonnie for final comments.
Yeah, no, thank you, Jim. No, I don't want the last word, and hopefully I won't be just echoing what people have said. But you know, this has been a good meeting. This has been a great meeting. Thank you, Lonnie, and everyone, you know, who helped, and maybe patting ourselves on the back, help put the program together. But you know what? We couldn't have had this meeting if we weren't where we are today. Just a couple of years ago, we wouldn't have been able to put such a great meeting. We've really come a long way. I mean, Jesse, you said it. Remember the conversations around this table, and Lonnie, you said it, pointing fingers. We couldn't have had this meeting. So it is a testament of where we've come. And I'm looking at KG and Sally globally, the WHO initiative, bringing FAO, OIE along the UN, taking it to UN. A lot of things have happened here. Domestically, we have the National Action Plan with concrete actions and measures, and some resources, limited, but some resources to get us started. And hearing the discussion here at the breakouts and back, I'm thinking some great things were said, and nobody, hope I won't offend anyone. No new ideas. I think that's what we've been talking about. You've maybe a little bit, as I say, refined some things that are being discussed and are happening a little bit. So, but the ideas will help bring them more to fruition, refine them, etc. Vaccines, we hadn't been, we've been talking a little bit about vaccines, but I've heard more vaccines maybe in our workout group. So maybe as a result of our discussion, there'll be more interest in advancing a few areas. Sustaining the interest, the momentum is important. One of the things that struck me is the public face, and Kathy, you showed the work that Pooh is doing. I think we need to do more of this. I think people have to see AR as a problem, their problem. We need to engage the public. The change that we've seen in patient safety, and where people are saying it's not acceptable to go to a healthcare setting to get treated and come out with adverse, event and death. And that's changed things. And I think with AR, we need the same people saying, no, it's not okay. I need the antibiotics protected so that when my son needs them, or when so we need more of that. I think I'll stop.
So we're not going to have a long closing here, but let me first of all thank everybody. Thank you for your involvement, your perseverance, and kind of the intellectual capacity around this table and around this room, and actually some of the breakout rooms that we've had. It's been, I think, extraordinary. Thank you for putting up with our experiment. We'll learn, we'll do it better if we continue to do that, but it is a way of engaging not only the forum, I think, in a more active way, but people with interests that are here. So thank you with that. Some of the follow-ups are, I talked to Cece about, we have a lot of lists. We talk about the priorities, but there's some really good ideas on there. So maybe we can kind of type those up and not make them part of the report through a clearance, but actually have them available so people can see those and maybe spend a little bit more time to take a look at those. So I think we can get that done. There will be a publication. So here's the last one we did on building communication capacity. Smaller than kind of some of the books we've done, so it gets out quicker. And these are the things that we take and send out. They are also available then with the National Academy free to download. And we can take this then forward and share it with a lot of other groups that I think need to hear about this. The presentations will be available. So in PDF form, thank you. There's where to go. So you can go back through some of these presentations and spend a little bit more time of looking at those slides and contemplating and reflecting on those. So that's another thing that that we'll promise that we'll get this done. And then it's been a really good couple days, and I do appreciate at a time that we worry about civility in this town. I think we had quite a bit of it here, and so maybe that's really a good model to kind of move forward. I liked KG's idea that this is concept shaping, I think. I kind of think that's what this is. And concept shaping is moving toward what he talked about is unification. But I think it really is an inflection. I mean, of all the good things we've heard are happening, we can slide back pretty easily. This is hard stuff. And I want to make sure that we kind of galvanize our purpose and our intention to move forward after this. We have to have wins, and those wins are things that are doable, that have impact, and they're measurable. And if you can do that in 18 months and we can give them to Sally Davies, I bet she can get another $100 million or whatever it is, Sally. But those are the things we have to deliver. And if there's been 200,000 scientific articles, there's probably enough to go ahead and actually start to act more. And I hope that this is a stimulus then for action to go forward. So thank you very much. This has been a really good couple days together. And I think we will be able to take this and do some different things with it than what we've kind of done in the past. And I look forward to other ideas about how we might share that. And I'm going to give the last word to our chair, David Relman.
Thanks, Lonnie. So I thought I would just go back and review each of the talks now and talk about some of the I don't have much to say. I just underscore all of what you said. There's a lot of collective wisdom in this room, and sometimes I think we might assume we somehow know best how to either disseminate, package, or propagate good thinking that happens in this room. To the degree that it can have impact, we are probably not maximizing it. All of you here, and anybody who is listening to this out there, please send us your ideas of how you think the proceedings of this meeting can have the most useful impact in your various spheres of work and influence as it can have. We know how to put out little booklets, but there are lots of other ways of communicating and disseminating ideas and suggestions. And there have been a lot of good ones here. So the question is just how to consolidate, package, and disseminate to the right people in the right settings. So please let us know. We want to be useful. And thank you again for being here and contributing all of your good energy and thinking. And thank you to all the organizers and staff again. You've done a great job. Thanks.